All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Reverend Richard Nordgren, Associate Member of St. John's Lutheran Church in beautiful Greenpoint, Brooklyn, coming to you tonight from hot and sticky Kew Gardens in Queens. We will be continuing tonight our study of the what we've been calling the many faces of God, from the Old Testament. Tonight's books that we will be examining are two fairly lightweights in comparison to what we just finished last week in the book of Job. Tonight we'll be going through Song of Songs and the book of Ruth. Now, but before we get into those two texts, I'd like to set a little bit of the context, for those two particular books. I'm going to start by drawing your attention to the 20th chapter of the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel was active at a time just before the southern kingdom of Judah fell to the Babylons, and its elite was taken into exile. And in this particular chapter, some of the elders of Israel had come to Ezekiel, saying they wanted to consult with God. Well, God was listening into that conversation. He did not wait for Ezekiel to make introductions. He just jumped right in and unloaded, a raft of complaints and accusations about the many times that Israel had betrayed the agreement between them by being unfaithful. And after each recitation of Israel's disloyalty, God pronounced he could have wiped them out, with a flick of a finger or a bat of an eye, or just even the thought. But God said he did not do as he was inclined, because, this is my words, the optics would have been horrible. What he said, I acted for my own name's sake, so that it would not be profaned in the sight of the nations. Then, after having said that, God went on to reveal that there were many times when he had ordered Israel to obey ordinances that were bad for them and not life-giving, which is a very strange thing coming from God, saying that he had put temptation in their path. I guess that's one way to look at it. But probably the safest translation of what we find in Ezekiel 20 is that God says, I misled you. And I was pointing you in directions that were not life-giving. And when God says that about himself, it raises the question, can God be both evil and good, demonic and just? Now, we have seen in our study of the Old Testament, over the last 20 some odd months, weeks, that there are times when God's destructive wrath was magnificent. But with the defeat of Judah, the destruction of the temple, the deportation of the mainstays of society, the question was raised, was somebody like Job more ethical than God? Now, I admit that this is a very strange juxtaposition, but Ezekiel was considering the possibility that the suffering of Israel was a crime of God. And what we studied last week, when we went through the book of Job, that book brought out that possibility into the light of day. It was conceivable to imagine that God's punishment of Israel had crossed the line. It had violated, an agreement and a norm. And there was no answer to the possibility that that was the case when we concluded Job. This week we're looking at Song of Songs and the book of Ruth, both of which have a very different place in the canon, being very different types of books. You know? And as we step away from the heaviness of Job, we find, in both of these stories, lightheartedness, which is very refreshing, very welcoming. It gives us some breathing space to consider the possibilities that God had overstepped the bounds in his dealing with Israel. When we look at the book Song of Songs and study its history and particularly how it was regarded within the Christian community, we will find that for a long time, the church interpreted this book as an allegory describing the relationship between Christ and the church. In recent times, in the last couple of centuries, critical scholarship, has debunked that thought that it's an allegory, and come to the point that Song of Songs is love poetry. One thing that makes the book Song of Songs so interesting, it is a book in which God is silent. In fact, God is absent from all the action which takes place. It is love poetry, and you would think, given the history that God has had such a profound and almost intrusive interest in human sexuality, that in this book, which deals with human sexuality, God is silent and absent. Megan, would you like to do a little reading from the Song of Songs?
Sure. Which one are you going to do?
Okay, well, I'll just sort of pick this one at random because I think it's sort of difficult. But chapter 4, okay, verses 1 through 8.
All right. How beautiful you are, my love. How very beautiful. Your eyes are doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats moving down the slopes of Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of shorn ewes that have come up from the washing, all of which bear twins, and not one among them is bereaved. Your lips are like a crimson thread, and your mouth is lovely. Your cheeks are like halves of a pomegranate behind your veil. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built in courses, and it hang 1,000 bucklers, all of them shields of warriors. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle that feed among the lilies. Until the day breathes and the shadows flee, I will hasten to the mountain of Mir and the hill of frankincense.
Frankincense, yeah.
Yeah. You are altogether beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you. Come with me from Lebanon, my bride. Come with me from Lebanon. Depart. There we go. That's it. Oh, keep going. Oh, from the peak of Amana, from the peak of Sinir and Hermon, from the dens of lions, from the mountains of leopards. There we go.
Okay. All right. When I was a young early teenager and in middle school, preparing for confirmation, our Sunday school teacher did a vast overview of the books of the Bible so that we would know what the main points of the Bible was all about. And when we got to the book Song of Songs, she says, we're going to skip this one over. And I don't want you to read it on your own. Well, that's just like, waving a red flag in front of a bull. Us young teenage boys in the class, I can't speak for the young women who were in the class, but the young teenage boys in the class quickly pulled the family Bible off the shelf and started reading Song of Songs. And by God, it was passionate. It truly was. And I can see why our Sunday school teacher didn't want us to get into that book. It is something that I've always wondered if, that how this particular book actually did get into the canon of the Old Testament. We have seen, as I said earlier, in previous years and generations, God was keenly interested in human sexuality and would encourage it, to further the goal that Israel was supposed to be a fruitful nation and grow in size and population. And this would have been a perfect time for God to offer encouragement to this young couple. Remember the first commandment I gave to your forefathers and foremothers. Be fruitful and multiply. And most of the time, people have been more than happy to comply with that, but often in illicit ways. So it would seem to me that God would encourage the relationship between the people and multiply, but he does not offer them words of wisdom or offer them counsel and advice. When it comes to this topic, which has been so important to God in the past, God is silent. He took apparently no interest in the union of this young couple, although they write about it in this book in great detail. And it's a puzzlement. We find the book Song of Songs a welcome relief from the solemn mood of Job. But we have to recognize that this book also is a screen blocking from our attention two salient questions. Where is God? And will God remain silent as he has since the time he blinked before Job? Megan, have you read this book in the past?
I didn't even know about this book. I was even Googling because when I saw the class notes for tonight, I was like, oh, am I looking in the right place? So then I just had to Google is Song of Songs the Songs of Solomon, and then I got the answer that I was able to find it. I didn't even know that this was a thing. But it seems much nicer.
Are you surprised to find it in the Bible?
A little bit, yeah. It's kind of it's just very different from anything else so far that we've been really looking at.
Yes.
So it's just it's like a complete shift. You go from Job where everything's horrible and God's doing some really interesting stuff, and then all of a sudden it's God's not talking anymore and we're talking about women's lips and stuff like that. It's just it's very different.
Yeah.
So
yeah, this is a wonderful book of the Bible to read to a lover. Yeah. Do you have any other questions or thoughts about this before we move on to Ruth?
I guess what I'm thinking is why God maybe God just felt really bad for all the stuff that he put Job through, and maybe he realized that maybe he was using his power for in the wrong way. So maybe he decided to take a step back and be I'm just gonna kind of see what happens, and maybe it's not my place to kind of interfere in these types of affairs as much, considering how he really just did Job very dirty.
Yeah.
That's just what I'm thinking, maybe why he stepped away until he decided to bring Jesus along in the New Testament, because everybody was still straying, and and he didn't want to, like, flood everybody out again. So he was like, oh, maybe I'll try this instead, it seems like. But that's all I got about that.
Okay. Well, it is not a book which is full of profound words of wisdom. It's not a book which is full of historical insight. It's not a book of prophecy by any means. No, it's just a good old love story. That's the best way I think we can look at it. It's a good old love story. The second book for our study tonight is the Book of Ruth. And it is perhaps one of the best known books of the Old Testament. And there's probably hardly a Mother's Day that goes by without someone mentioning Ruth and Naomi. And it's a story about two women who under difficult circumstances find a way to deal with adversity, and they do so with courage and pluck and in ways which shows their independence and determination to be who they are. Okay? In the book of Ruth, God is mentioned. Unlike the Song of Songs, God does have a place in here, but he's not the main actor in this story, not by any means. Sort of like Proverbs, where God was the framer on the picture. I think you can see the same thing in the story of Ruth and Naomi. Let's see, get to that. Joshua, Judges. There we go. Okay. All right. It says that this was set in the time of the judges, but in all reality, we don't know exactly when this event occurred, even if it had historical accuracy. The chapter opens with a description of recent events. In those days, when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judea went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and two sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi. The name of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion, and they were Ephraimites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her two sons. These took Moabite wives. The names of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. And they had lived there about 10 years. Both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her two sons and her husband. So it was a difficult situation, being an Israelite living in the country of Moab. But it was perhaps very difficult because the two nations had a long-standing blood feud. It goes back to the days of the conquest. But we also know that the antagonism between two nations that was perhaps acted out at the highest level was not always, engaged at the person-to-person. The borders, were not formal, they were not strict, they were not enforced, and if it was drought conditions in one part of the country, people would just migrate to where there was water and the possibility of growing crops and raising their flocks. So apparently that's what happened. Okay? In the setup of the story as we have read, you see that the real action is between Ruth and Naomi. Naomi is about to return to her homeland in Judah, and she advised her daughters-in-law to remain behind and worship the God of their place of residence. Now, stop and think about that for a minute. At the practical level, it probably was pretty sound advice. But over the sweep of history and Israel's dealings with its neighbors and its God, such advice would have brought down thunder and brimstone. It was not the sort of thing that a loyal Israelite would recommend to stay behind and worship foreign gods. It just would not. Well, since this advice had come from an Israelite, Naomi, you would have expected, at least I would have expected, that there would have been consequences, but there was none. And so I think it's safe to say that by the time the book of Ruth was written, many people had come to a conclusion that God was going to remain inactive. If at the local and individual level, people were encouraging disloyalty, there was not going to be any reprisals. So this is the story of, as I said, two very resourceful women who learned how to prosper in a world which is hostile to women. Ruth, the story, is also a wonderful counterweight to the attitude of many post-exilic prophets and other authors. These people, dreamed of grand utopian conditions where the restoration of Israel would take place no matter what the cost. Ruth and Naomi just wanted a decent life for themselves. They were not interested in the transformation of human nature. They were not interested in the restoration of human institutions. Such things were well above their pay grade, and certainly, as we can tell, well above their area of concern. So Naomi is a mentor to the younger Ruth, and she offers her younger colleague some sound advice on how to attract a new husband. And so there's this fellow Boaz, and he's sort of smitten with Ruth. And he says to her, "Look, I'll instruct my farmhands not to gather in all the grain. I'll leave quite a bit for you and Naomi to glean. Then you won't go hungry." It's more than just a nice gesture. I think we can safely say that Boaz, found Ruth rather delightful, and that he had taken notice of her, even though a foreigner, and was interested in pushing the relationship a little bit further. Now, we don't know how strong that was, but we do know that Naomi, instructed her daughter-in-law, to put on her best gown, get her hair set, get the nails done. Well, Megan, would you read from chapter 3? And that gives it better than my description. Okay? Starting at verse 1.
And when am I going to?
down to 13.
Okay. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, I need to seek some security for you so that it may be well with you. Now here is our kinsman Boaz, with whose young women you have been working. See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Now wash and anoint yourself and put on your best clothes and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he is finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." She said to her, "All that you tell me, I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, and he was in a contented mood, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came stealthily and uncovered his feet and laid down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and there, lying at his feet, was a woman. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your cloak over your servant, for you are next of kin." He said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. This last instance of your loyalty is better than the first. You have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. For all the assembly of my people, know that you are a worthy woman. But now, though it is true that I am a near kinsman, there is another kinsman more closely related than I. Remain this night, and in the morning, if he will act as next of kin for you, good. Let him do it. If he is willing to act as next of kin for you, then as the Lord lives, I will act as next of kin for you. Lie down until the morning."
Okay. Well, it doesn't take too much reading between the lines to get the idea that there is a little hanky-panky going on that night. And yeah, if you remember the instructions that God gave Israel at Sinai when the covenant was formed, um, the Moabites were regarded as a hostile and enemy nation. Yeah? And dealings with them were to be very limited, and marriage was, off bounds. That was not permitted. But here we see, an Israelite woman, Naomi, encouraging a Moabite woman, Ruth, to snuggle up and make a little noises to Israelite man. And yeah, well, maybe God has changed his mind about intermarriage, but if so, no one knew about it. Maybe God did, maybe God didn't. We have no proof to support one contention or the other. All we know is that what had been a serious offense in the past, this time God did nothing, didn't say a word, didn't throw down a single thunderbolt, did not get angry and promise retribution. For all we know, Ruth and Boaz lived happily ever after. So that's the story of Ruth. It's so like I said, it's a story which is just wildly popular at Mother's Day. The relationship between Naomi and Ruth is held up as a paragon of a loving and supportive relationship within the family. And that it is. You can't subtract that from the story and still have the story as it's presented to us. But like the Song of Songs, should mention, it's sometimes called the Song of Solomon. Now, we've come across two books in the era after Job, in which, God may get mentioned and assumed, but God is silent. God is inactive. There's no particular commendations to be made, no warnings given, no prophet sent. What we see is, two very human vignettes about ordinary people trying to make it in life. Two young lovers, so eager to consummate their relationship. Ruth and Naomi looking for security in a world where it was hard for women to find that. So, in one sense, we should be glad that the tone and mood has shifted from the solemn and heavy weight of Job to the more lighthearted and encouraging tone of the psalm in Ruth. But still, we're left wondering, is God going to say anything again? Will God become active in ways that are reminiscent of the way he did before the destruction of Jerusalem, the temple, and the deportation? We shall see. We shall see. For next week, we will be looking at Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, and Esther. There are fairly short books. Lamentations and Ecclesiastes are considered part of the wisdom literature. And Esther is a historical narrative. And we'll see what sort of new and good things that come out of that. Megan, do you have any final thoughts or questions you want to ask about either of the two books we went through tonight?
I guess, when I think about, these two and how God kind of stayed out of it.
Yeah.
It seems like he stays out of matters of love more often than other things, with the exception of when when that one guy cheated on his wife and then God inflicted punishment on the child. I forgot which book that was.
Yeah,
But largely, he's remained kind of quiet about matters of love, it seems like.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if maybe that, he didn't feel like he needed to get involved as much with that, and rather other larger issues, maybe, of how humans were screwing up. But yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I don't know if maybe that's, maybe he figured I don't have to get involved as much as in individual lives. And especially because that one guy that was cheating on his wife was part of the that promise that was made, more so than maybe how Ruth and these women and their husbands were directly involved in things. Maybe he was oh, I don't need to get involved in this.
Could be. We shall see as the weeks go on. So I'd like to close this with a prayer. You can log off for the night. So join me. Gracious and loving God. Once again, we have lots of questions to ask of you. Things that we wonder about. Because in our own life, there are times when we would love to hear your voice speak more clearly. We would love to hear you address us with certitude and certainty. We would love to have you comment with us and lead us more visibly in the things that we do. But you have chosen to let us work things out on our own. And we hope that that is a mark of your trust and reliance upon us to do good things more often than not. There are times when it seems like we make a mess of things, And we ask for, your forgiveness where we have been stubborn and wrong-headed, just been willingly deluded by false information to the suffering of many and to the offense of you. So we ask you, dear Lord, to bless us this night with your presence. May we find you active in ways which surprise and delight us. We do ask for these things in your Son's name. Amen.